Why do people chase those who ignore them? Why does silence make someone suddenly start confessing things they swore they'd never tell? And why does forcing a smile actually change your mood? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of what you think you know about human behavior is wrong. We walk through life believing we're rational creatures making conscious decisions. But psychology has uncovered something far more unsettling. We're predictable machines running on ancient code we don't even know exists. Right now, someone is manipulating you, using these exact patterns. Maybe it's a coworker who knows silence will make you fill the void with information you shouldn't share. Maybe it's someone who's ignoring you precisely because they know it'll make you obsess over them. These aren't accidents. They're the hidden rules of human behavior that most people never learn. But here's what separates you from everyone else after the next few minutes. You're about to see the code. The psychological mechanisms that control human behavior, like invisible puppet strings. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. Every interaction, every relationship, every conversation. You'll watch these patterns play out in real time, while others remain completely blind. Warning: this knowledge changes everything. Are you ready? Why ignoring someone makes them obsessed. There's a psychological phenomenon happening right now that most people experience, but almost nobody understands. You text someone. They don't respond. Suddenly, that person occupies your entire mental space. You check your phone obsessively. You replay conversations. You wonder what you did wrong. The person who was barely on your radar 5 minutes ago has now colonized your thoughts completely. This isn't random. This is your brain being hijacked by one of the most powerful psychological mechanisms ever discovered. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same principle that makes gambling addictive. When rewards come unpredictably, sometimes yes, sometimes no, sometimes maybe, the brain becomes obsessed with figuring out the pattern. Consistent attention? Your brain adapts and stops caring. Total absence? Your brain eventually gives up. But inconsistent attention, ignoring followed by occasional responsiveness, creates a psychological trap that's almost impossible to escape. Here's what's happening in your brain when someone ignores you. The nucleus accumbens, your brain's reward center, fires up in anticipation. It's expecting the dopamine hit that comes from social connection. But when that reward doesn't arrive, instead of shutting down, it actually intensifies. The brain interprets the absence as a puzzle to solve, not a signal to move on. This is why you can't stop thinking about the person who's not texting back while you barely think about the person who always responds immediately. The reliable person has become predictable, boring to your reward system. The ignorer has become a slot machine that might pay out, and your brain is pulling that lever obsessively. But there's an even deeper mechanism at work called the Zeigarnik effect. The human brain has a pathological need to complete unfinished business. An incomplete conversation, an unresolved interaction, an unexplained silence. These create what psychologists call cognitive tension. Your mind literally cannot rest until the loop is closed. Think about it. You can watch an entire movie and forget it the next day. But pause that same movie 3/4 through, and you'll think about it for days. The story is incomplete. Your brain is in a state of unresolved tension. This is exactly what ignoring does in social contexts. It creates an unfinished narrative that your mind compulsively tries to resolve. The person ignoring you hasn't just disappeared. They've left you in psychological limbo, and your brain will do almost anything to escape that state, including obsessing over them constantly. There's also a neurological component related to threat detection. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, is always scanning for social threats. In our evolutionary past, being excluded from the group meant death. Your ancestors who didn't care about social rejection didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. So when someone ignores you, your amygdala registers this as a potential threat to your survival. Not consciously, obviously. You know logically that an unanswered text won't kill you. But the ancient part of your brain doesn't know the difference between being ignored on social media and being abandoned by your tribe on the savannah. This triggers a stress response. Cortisol floods your system. Your attention narrows and focuses on the threat. You become hypervigilant to any sign from this person. Every notification makes your heart race. This isn't love or even strong interest. This is your survival system being activated by perceived social danger. Now here's where it gets manipulative, and this is what most people don't realize. Some individuals have figured this out intuitively. They understand that attention creates attachment, but inconsistent attention creates obsession. They're not ignoring you because they're busy or uninterested. They're ignoring you because it works. These people have learned to weaponize the psychology of intermittent reinforcement. They give just enough attention to keep you hooked, then withdraw to create desperation. It's not a relationship strategy, it's a control strategy. And if you don't understand the mechanism, you'll mistake the anxiety and obsession for genuine feelings. The cruelest part? This pattern actually prevents real connection. You're not getting to know the person. You're getting addicted to the uncertainty they create. You're not falling for who they are. You're falling for the dopamine roller coaster they've put you on. But there's a flip side to this that's equally important. Understanding this mechanism means you can break free from it. The moment you recognize that your obsession is a predictable neurological response to intermittent reinforcement, not evidence of special connection or destiny, the spell breaks. Your brain is looking for certainty. Give it certainty by making a decision. Either this person is interested and consistent, or they're not worth your mental energy. The middle ground, the maybe, the intermittent attention, that's the trap. Eliminate the ambiguity yourself, and the obsession dissolves. There's also a powerful lesson here about your own behavior. If you want someone to value you, being consistently available actually works against you, at least initially. This isn't about playing games. It's about understanding that the human brain is wired to pursue what's uncertain and take for granted what's guaranteed. Strategic unavailability, not ghosting, not manipulation, but genuine boundaries and independent life, actually increases your value in others' eyes. Not because you're being fake, but because you're activating the same psychological mechanisms that make pursuit feel compelling. Think about the people you've been most interested in throughout your life. Chances are, at least some of them were people who weren't entirely available to you. Not abusive, not cruel, just genuinely busy with their own lives, genuinely independent, genuinely not making you their entire world. That unavailability made them magnetic. Meanwhile, the people who made you their entire focus, who always responded immediately, who were always available, they probably felt suffocating even if you couldn't articulate why. This is the paradox of human attachment. We say we want certainty, but uncertainty is what keeps us engaged. We say we want someone who's always there, but constant availability kills attraction. We say we want to be pursued, but we pursue those who make us work for it. The ignoring dynamic reveals a fundamental truth about human psychology. We don't value what comes easily. We value what we have to earn, what challenges us, what remains slightly out of reach. This isn't superficiality. It's how the reward systems in our brains are fundamentally structured. But here's the critical distinction that separates healthy dynamics from toxic ones. There's a difference between someone who has their own life and occasionally isn't available, versus someone who's deliberately withholding attention to manipulate you. The first is attractive because it's authentic. The second is damaging because it's strategic. How do you tell the difference? Consistency over time. A genuinely busy, independent person has a life that sometimes makes them unavailable, but the overall pattern is responsive and engaged. A manipulator's pattern is hot and cold, intense then distant, with no external life circumstances explaining the shifts. The inconsistency itself is the point. Understanding why ignoring creates obsession also reveals why so many modern relationships fail. Dating apps, social media, constant connectivity, these have created an environment of infinite options and zero commitment. People can keep dozens of potential partners in rotation, giving each one just enough attention to maintain interest while never fully engaging with anyone. This creates a population of people who are perpetually obsessed with those who ignore them, while ignoring those who are genuinely interested. Everyone's chasing the unavailable while being unavailable to those chasing them. It's a system designed to maximize longing and minimize actual connection. The solution isn't to become a manipulator yourself. It's to understand the game well enough that you stop playing it. When you recognize that your obsession with someone who ignores you is a neurological glitch, not insight into your true feelings, you can make rational choices instead of being jerked around by your reward system. And perhaps most importantly, You can build relationships based on mutual presence rather than strategic absence. The deepest connections don't come from keeping someone uncertain about your interest. They come from creating safety and consistency while maintaining your own identity and independence. The person worth your time isn't the one who makes you obsess through absence. It's the one who makes you feel alive through presence. Your brain might need to learn this lesson consciously because your instincts were calibrated for a world that no longer exists. Ignoring gets attention. That's the fact. But attention gained through absence is ultimately empty. It's your brain chemistry responding to patterns, not your heart recognizing partnership. Know the difference, and you'll save yourself years of chasing ghosts while missing the humans actually standing in front of you. The silence trap. How quiet forces confession. Silence is supposed to be the absence of communication, but psychology has discovered something far stranger. Silence is one of the most powerful communication tools that exists, and most people are completely defenseless against it. Watch an experienced interrogator work. They ask a question, then they wait. The suspect answers. Then comes the critical moment. Instead of asking another question, the interrogator just sits there, silent, staring, waiting, and something almost magical happens. The suspect, who was carefully controlling their story, suddenly starts talking again. They elaborate. They over-explain. They fill the silence with information they never intended to share. This isn't coincidence. This is a hardwired psychological vulnerability that almost every human shares. The phenomenon is called conversational pressure, and it's rooted in how our brains process social interaction. Humans are intensely social creatures. We've evolved over millions of years to maintain group cohesion through communication. Silence between people creates a kind of social vacuum that our brains interpret as dangerous. When you're talking to someone and they go silent, your brain doesn't interpret this neutrally. It interprets it as potential rejection, confusion, or disapproval. This triggers anxiety, and the natural response to that anxiety is to fill the void with words. Any words. Even words you didn't want to say. Here's the mechanism. In conversation, there's an unspoken rhythm, a back and forth that feels natural. When someone breaks that rhythm by not responding, it creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Your brain expected a response. It didn't get one. This mismatch between expectation and reality creates psychological discomfort. Most people are so uncomfortable with this feeling that they'll do anything to make it stop. And the fastest way to make it stop is to keep talking, to explain, to justify, to fill the silence with sound until the normal rhythm of conversation resumes and the anxiety disappears. But here's what makes this so powerful as a tool. The silence isn't just creating discomfort. It's creating a very specific kind of psychological vulnerability. When you're anxious, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking and self-control, becomes less active. Meanwhile, your amygdala, the emotional center, becomes more active. In this state, you're less capable of controlling what you say. The filter between thought and speech weakens. Secrets slip out. True feelings emerge. Information you meant to protect suddenly feels less important than ending the unbearable discomfort of the silence. This is why the best negotiators, therapists, and investigators are comfortable with silence. They understand that most people will tell you almost anything if you just stay quiet long enough. The silence does the work for them. There's also a projection mechanism at play. When someone is silent, your brain tries to fill in the gaps. What are they thinking? Why aren't they responding? Since you can't actually know, your mind creates narratives. And those narratives are almost always more negative than reality. You assume judgment, disappointment, anger. These imagined reactions feel real, and they increase your anxiety. To counter these imagined negative reactions, you start over-explaining, trying to fix a problem that exists only in your interpretation of their silence. Meanwhile, the silent person isn't thinking any of those things. They're just waiting. But your brain has constructed an entire psychological drama out of their absence of words, and you're responding to that drama as if it's real. Think about the last time you sent a text message and didn't get a response for several hours. Your mind probably created dozens of stories. They're angry. They're ignoring me. They don't care. I said something wrong. And with each imagined scenario, your anxiety probably increased. Now imagine that same dynamic face to face. Someone asks you a question. You answer. They just look at you silently. Within seconds, you're probably talking again, adding details, justifying your answer, trying to read their face, attempting to end the discomfort their silence is creating. This is happening because silence forces you to confront uncertainty. And the human brain hates uncertainty more than almost anything else. We'd rather have bad news than no news. We'd rather hear criticism than receive silence. Uncertainty is psychologically intolerable. So we fill it. With words, with explanations, with confessions we never meant to make. Law enforcement has known this for decades. The Reid technique, one of the most common interrogation methods, explicitly uses silence as a tool. Ask a question. Wait for an answer. Then stay silent. The suspect will often keep talking, providing more information than the question required, simply to fill the uncomfortable void. But this isn't just about interrogation. This same dynamic plays out in every area of life. Job interviews, first dates, arguments with partners, negotiations, therapy sessions. The person comfortable with silence has an enormous psychological advantage. Because while you're anxiously filling the void with words, they're collecting information. They're watching you reveal yourself. They're learning your fears, your insecurities, your truths. All because you can't tolerate the discomfort of quiet. There's also a status dynamic embedded in this. The person who can remain silent is implicitly claiming higher status. They're not anxious. They're not desperate to be liked or understood. They're comfortable with discomfort. This confidence is perceived as power. Meanwhile, the person frantically filling the silence is implicitly signaling lower status. They need approval. They need to be understood. They can't handle the tension. This desperation is perceived as weakness. Neither person is consciously thinking about status, but these dynamics are being communicated and processed beneath conscious awareness, shaping how each person is perceived and how the relationship develops. Now here's the really interesting part. Once you understand this mechanism, you can protect yourself from it. The next time someone's silence makes you want to keep talking, recognize what's happening. That urge to fill the void? That's your anxiety talking, not your wisdom. Pause. Breathe. Get comfortable with the discomfort. Match their silence with your own. This completely changes the dynamic. You're no longer playing the game on their terms. You're demonstrating that you're equally comfortable with quiet. And watch what happens. Often, the person who was using silence strategically will suddenly start talking. Because now they're experiencing the same pressure they were creating in you. The tool they were wielding has been turned back on them. But there's also a more subtle skill here. Learning to use silence yourself, not manipulatively, but strategically. In conversations where you want to understand someone more deeply, ask a question, then actually wait for the answer. Don't rush to the next question. Don't fill the space with your own thoughts. Just wait. Most people will tell you far more than you asked for, simply because you gave them space to think and talk without pressure. The silence becomes a gift rather than a weapon. It says, I'm genuinely interested in what you have to say. Take your time. This is especially powerful in relationships. When your partner is struggling with something, the instinct is to fill the space with solutions, reassurances, or your own stories. But if you can sit in silence with them, just being present without needing to fix or fill, you create a depth of connection that words often can't achieve. Silence also reveals truth in ways that words conceal. People can lie with what they say. It's much harder to lie with how you handle silence. Discomfort reveals. Comfort conceals. The person squirming in silence is probably hiding something. The person relaxed in silence probably isn't. This is why experienced poker players watch how opponents handle the quiet moments between hands. The stillness reveals more than the action. The person who can't sit still, who needs constant distraction, who fills every pause with chatter, they're signaling anxiety. And anxiety usually means something to hide or fear. There's also a meditative quality to embracing silence in conversation. Most people are so busy planning what they'll say next that they're not actually listening. Silence forces you to be present. You can't be rehearsing your response when you're genuinely comfortable with not responding immediately. This presence is rare and valuable. People can feel when you're truly listening versus waiting for your turn to talk. And that feeling of being genuinely heard is so uncommon that it creates powerful bonds. But perhaps the most important lesson about silence forcing confession is this. The confessions silence extracts are often the truths we most need to hear. Not because someone manipulated them out of us, but because the silence created space for what was already there to emerge. We carry so many unspoken thoughts, unexpressed feelings, hidden truths. The noise of constant conversation allows us to avoid them. But silence removes that escape. In the quiet, what's real rises to the surface. This is why people often have breakthrough realizations in meditation, long drives, or showers. The silence stops the mental chatter long enough for deeper truths to be heard. The same thing happens in conversation. Strategic silence creates space for wisdom that constant talking buries. So the next time someone's silence makes you anxious, remember, you don't owe them your secrets just because they stopped talking. Sit with the discomfort. Learn to be comfortable in the quiet. And when you do speak, let it be because you chose to, not because the silence manipulated it out of you. Silence is a trap only for those who don't understand it. For everyone else, it's a tool, a test, and sometimes, a truth. The eye contact lie you've been told. You've heard it your entire life. Liars avoid eye contact. If someone won't look you in the eye, they're hiding something. It's one of the most widely believed facts about human behavior. Police officers are trained on it. Parents teach it to their children. Job interviewers use it to assess candidates. There's just one problem. It's completely wrong. Modern psychology has thoroughly debunked this myth, but the belief persists because it feels true. And that gap between what feels true and what is actually true creates massive blind spots in how we read people. Here's what the research actually shows. Practiced liars make more eye contact than truth-tellers, not less. They know about the cultural belief that liars avoid eye contact, so they deliberately overcompensate. They lock eyes with you, hold your gaze intensely, and use eye contact as a tool to sell the lie. Meanwhile, honest people often look away, especially when they're thinking, remembering details, or discussing something emotionally difficult. Breaking eye contact is a natural part of cognitive processing. Your brain literally works better when you're not maintaining eye contact during complex mental tasks. So the cultural script is backwards. The person staring you down might be lying. The person glancing away might be telling the truth. But we've been conditioned to interpret it exactly opposite. Here's why this myth persists, despite the evidence. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We desperately want simple rules for detecting deception, because deception is threatening. If liars avoid eye contact, then maintaining eye contact proves honesty. It's a clean, easy rule. But human behavior is never that simple. The reality is far more nuanced, context-dependent, and difficult to read. This makes us uncomfortable, so we cling to the simple rule even when it's wrong. There's also a cultural component. In Western cultures, direct eye contact signals confidence, honesty, and respect. In many Eastern cultures, direct eye contact can signal aggression or disrespect, especially toward authority figures. A person from a culture where avoiding eye contact shows respect might be judged as dishonest, in a culture that interprets the same behavior as evasion. The rule doesn't account for cultural variation, neurodiversity, trauma history, or individual personality differences. An autistic person might avoid eye contact because it's neurologically overwhelming, not because they're lying. A trauma survivor might struggle with eye contact because it feels threatening, not because they're hiding something. But here's where it gets really interesting from a psychological standpoint. The eye contact myth persists partly because it's self-fulfilling. If you believe someone is lying because they won't look at you, you become suspicious and hostile. This makes the other person more anxious and uncomfortable, which makes them avoid eye contact even more. You then interpret this as confirmation that they're lying. You've created the very behavior you're using as evidence, and you're completely unaware that you're doing it. Research by psychologist Albert Vrij has shown that cognitive load, not guilt or deception, is what actually affects eye contact. When people are lying, they're managing multiple mental tasks simultaneously. They're constructing the false narrative, monitoring your reactions, remembering what they've said to keep the story consistent, and suppressing the truth. This cognitive complexity means they have fewer mental resources available for maintaining eye contact. But the same is true for someone trying to remember complex, truthful information. The mental effort of accurate recall creates the same cognitive load. So decreased eye contact indicates mental effort, not necessarily deception. But we interpret it as deception because that's what we've been taught. Now let's talk about what actually indicates deception, because this is where psychology gets genuinely useful. Instead of focusing on eye contact, researchers have identified clusters of behaviors that are more reliable indicators. Deceptive people tend to reduce hand movements and gestures. Lying requires concentration, and natural gesturing decreases when cognitive load is high. They also tend to use fewer first-person pronouns. Distancing language like that person instead of I or me suggests psychological distancing from the lie. Their stories often lack vivid detail. When people recall real experiences, they include sensory details, emotions, and seemingly irrelevant side notes. Fabricated stories tend to be cleaner, more logical, and missing the messy details that characterize actual memory. There's also something called duping delight. Some liars experience a subtle pleasure in deceiving someone, and this can leak through in micro-expressions, particularly slight smiling at inappropriate moments. This isn't universal, but it's far more reliable than eye contact patterns. Verbal inconsistencies over time are another strong indicator. If someone's story changes in substantial ways across retellings, that suggests fabrication. Real memories are relatively stable. False narratives drift and evolve as the person forgets what they previously claimed. But even these indicators aren't certainties. They're probabilities. Human lie detection, even among trained professionals, rarely exceeds 60% accuracy. We're actually not much better than chance at detecting lies, despite our confidence that we can tell when someone's being dishonest. This is humbling, but important. It means we should hold our judgments more lightly, especially when they're based on behavioral cues we've been taught to trust. The eye contact myth also does active harm in high-stakes situations. Innocent people have been convicted partly because they avoided eye contact with interrogators or juries, and this was interpreted as evidence of guilt. Job candidates have been rejected because their natural shyness or cultural background made them avoid direct eye contact, and interviewers read this as dishonesty. We're making life-altering judgments about people based on a rule that science has thoroughly disproven, and we're doing it with complete confidence because the myth is so culturally embedded. So what should replace the eye contact rule? Honestly, skepticism about your ability to detect lies at all. Instead of trying to read people's truthfulness from their behavior, focus on verifiable facts. Cross-check stories against evidence. Ask detailed questions that would be difficult to answer if the story was fabricated. If someone claims they were somewhere, look for evidence they were actually there. If they claim something happened, look for corroboration. Don't rely on your gut feeling based on how they looked at you while talking. This is less satisfying because it requires actual work instead of the instant judgment that behavioral cues seem to provide. But it's far more reliable. There's also value in recognizing your own biases. If you're predisposed to trust or distrust someone based on other factors, their eye contact patterns will be interpreted through that lens. You'll see what confirms your existing belief, not what's actually happening. The person you already like will be forgiven for avoiding eye contact. The person you already dislike will be suspected because of the same behavior. The behavior itself is neutral. Your interpretation is biased. Understanding this doesn't make you better at detecting lies. It makes you appropriately humble about your limitations. And that humility is far more valuable than false confidence in a broken rule. The eye contact lie reveals something important about human psychology. We want certainty more than we want truth. We'd rather have a simple, wrong rule than navigate the complexity of actually understanding human behavior. We'd rather trust our gut, even when our gut is consistently wrong, than admit we can't easily tell when someone's deceiving us. But the cost of this false certainty is high. We misjudge people constantly. We trust the wrong people and suspect the innocent. We make decisions based on myths instead of evidence. And we rarely question the rules we've been taught because questioning them means confronting how little we actually know. So the next time someone avoids your eyes, pause before assuming they're lying. Consider the dozen other reasons they might break eye contact that have nothing to do with honesty. And remember that the person staring you down with unwavering confidence might be the one selling you the biggest lie of all. Eye contact tells you almost nothing reliable about truthfulness, but your belief that it does. That tells you everything about how easily our minds trick us into seeing patterns that don't exist. Why intelligence kills your social life. There's a study that psychologists don't like to talk about in public because the findings make people uncomfortable. It's research by evolutionary psychologist Satoshi Kanazawa, and the data is clear. Highly intelligent people have fewer friends, and they're happier that way. This contradicts everything we're told about human flourishing. We're social creatures. We need community. Isolation is bad for mental health. All of that is true for most people. But intelligence changes the equation in ways that reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature and social dynamics. Let's start with the evolutionary psychology angle. For most of human history, living in close-knit groups was essential for survival. Your tribe protected you from predators, helped you gather food, and defended against hostile groups. Social connection wasn't optional. It was survival. Our brains evolved to crave social interaction because our ancestors who didn't care about the group died out. The ones who thrived were those who valued relationships, who felt pain from exclusion, who worked hard to maintain social bonds. That's most of us. Our brains are wired for connection because connection meant survival. But here's where intelligence creates a divergence. Highly intelligent people are better at solving problems independently. They can achieve goals without requiring group cooperation. They can entertain themselves with complex thoughts, ideas, and projects that don't require other people. Essentially, intelligence reduces the evolutionary need for constant social contact. What serves as essential support for average intelligence becomes optional for high intelligence. Not because intelligent people don't value relationships, but because they're less dependent on quantity of relationships for survival and flourishing. The research shows that people with higher IQs report lower life satisfaction when they socialize more frequently. Read that again because it's counterintuitive. For most people, more social interaction equals more happiness. For highly intelligent people, more social interaction equals less happiness. This isn't because intelligent people are antisocial or damaged, it's because their brains are optimized for different activities. Extended social interaction, particularly the kind that doesn't involve intellectual depth, is cognitively draining for them in a way it isn't for average intelligence. Think about the typical social gathering. Small talk about weather, gossip about mutual acquaintances, discussions about sports or popular entertainment. For most people, this is pleasurable. It activates reward centers, fulfills social needs, feels good. For highly intelligent people, this same interaction often feels like running cognitive software that their brain isn't optimized for. It's effortful rather than effortless, draining rather than energizing. They're not being snobs. Their brains literally process social interaction differently. There's also the simple statistical reality of compatibility. Intelligence follows a bell curve. Most people cluster around average. The farther you move from average in either direction, the fewer people exist at your level. If you have an IQ of 140, you're smarter than 99.6% of the population. This means that in any random social setting, there's a 99.6% chance that the people around you can't engage with ideas at the level you naturally operate. Not because they're lesser, but because cognitive compatibility is rare at the extremes. It's like being 7 feet tall. Not better, just different and statistically isolated. This creates a chronic sense of not quite fitting. Conversations that others find stimulating feel surface level. Jokes that others find hilarious fall flat. Interests that fascinate you bore others. The social world is built for the average, and when you're not average, everything requires translation and adjustment. So intelligent people often choose fewer, deeper friendships over many shallow ones. They'd rather have 2 friends who can engage intellectually than 20 acquaintances who can't. Quality over quantity isn't a preference. It's an adaptation to statistical isolation. There's also the pace issue. Intelligent people process information faster. They make connections more quickly. They see implications that others miss. This means that in conversation, they're often several steps ahead, waiting for others to catch up. This isn't judgment, it's just cognitive reality. And that constant waiting, that perpetual slowing down to match the pace of conversation, is exhausting over extended periods. Then there's the complexity problem. Highly intelligent people tend to see nuance, ambiguity, and multiple perspectives simultaneously. This makes them frustrating conversation partners for people who prefer clear-cut answers and simple narratives. When someone shares a problem and wants sympathy, the intelligent person might offer 5 different perspectives on why it happened, and 3 potential solutions. This isn't helpful, it's overwhelming. The person wanted validation, not analysis. But the intelligent brain automatically goes to complexity. Over time, intelligent people learn to suppress this tendency in social settings, but suppression is work. Authentic interaction becomes impossible because being authentic means being too much, too fast, too complex. So they either exhaust themselves maintaining a simplified version of themselves, or they reduce social contact to preserve energy. There's also what psychologists call the curse of knowledge. Once you understand something deeply, it's almost impossible to remember what it was like not to understand it. This makes communication across intelligence gaps genuinely difficult. The intelligent person thinks they're explaining clearly, but they're skipping steps that are obvious to them and opaque to others. The other person feels stupid or condescended to, even when no condescension was intended. These small friction points accumulate across interactions, making socializing feel fraught. But perhaps the most significant factor is purpose. Highly intelligent people often have consuming interests, projects, or goals that require enormous time and focus. Time spent socializing is time not spent on the thing they're genuinely passionate about. For someone whose deepest satisfaction comes from mastering a complex skill, solving difficult problems, or creating something original, social time often feels like an interruption rather than a reward. Not always, not with everyone, but often enough that they become selective about when and with whom they socialize. This gets misinterpreted as elitism or antisocial behavior, but it's actually just priority management. They're not saying people aren't important, they're saying that most social interaction doesn't provide enough value to justify the opportunity cost. Now here's where this gets controversial. There's a tendency to romanticize intelligence as if it's purely advantageous. But social isolation, even chosen isolation, has costs. Humans are social creatures, regardless of intelligence. Complete isolation damages mental health even for the highly intelligent. The advantage intelligent people have is that they need less social contact than average to maintain well-being. Not that they need none. They still need connection, just less frequently and more selectively. There's also the career and relationship implications. Many life opportunities come through networks and social connections. By having fewer friends, intelligent people often have smaller networks, which can limit opportunities. The brilliant loner with no connections often achieves less than the moderately intelligent person with strong social skills. And romantic relationships require social skills regardless of intelligence. A high IQ doesn't teach you empathy, emotional regulation, or communication skills. Intelligent people can be just as dysfunctional in relationships as anyone else. Sometimes more so because they intellectualize emotions rather than feeling them. So the picture is more nuanced than intelligence equals happiness with fewer friends. It's more like intelligence changes the social equation in ways that make fewer, deeper connections optimal. But that optimization comes with trade-offs that shouldn't be ignored. Understanding this pattern also helps reduce judgment in both directions. If you're highly intelligent and always felt weird about not wanting constant social interaction, you're not broken. Your brain is optimized differently. Honor that instead of forcing yourself into social patterns that don't fit. And if you're not highly intelligent and you've judged smart people as cold or antisocial, consider that they might be managing cognitive and energy limitations you don't experience. Their distance isn't rejection, it's self-preservation. The research on intelligence and friendships reveals something profound about human diversity. We're not all wired the same way. What constitutes a rich social life varies dramatically based on cognitive factors most people never consider. The extroverted person with dozens of friends isn't more psychologically healthy than the intelligent introvert with 2 deep friendships. They're just optimized for different social ecosystems. Neither is right. Neither is wrong. They're just different strategies for navigating the same human need for connection. Intelligence kills your social life only if you're trying to maintain a social life designed for a different kind of brain. Build the social life that fits your actual cognitive and emotional needs, and intelligence becomes an asset rather than a barrier. The key is knowing yourself well enough to build accordingly, and having the courage to ignore the social scripts that don't fit just because they're what everyone else is doing. Your body betrays every lie you tell. You can control your words. With practice, you can even control your facial expressions. But your body tells the truth even when your mouth is lying, and it does so in ways you're completely unaware of. This is the foundation of body language research, and it reveals something unsettling about human communication. We're constantly broadcasting information we don't intend to share, and others are receiving that information whether they consciously recognize it or not. Let's start with the basics. When someone is lying or uncomfortable, their body goes into subtle stress response. This isn't dramatic. They're not sweating bullets or trembling. But micro changes happen that trained observers can detect. Increased blinking rate. When people lie, they tend to blink more frequently than normal. The brain is under cognitive load from constructing and maintaining the false narrative, and this stress manifests in increased blinking. It's involuntary and almost impossible to control consciously. Hand-to-face touching. Liars often touch their face, particularly their mouth, nose, or ears, more than truth-tellers. Psychologists believe this is a self-soothing behavior, an unconscious attempt to calm the anxiety that deception creates. The hand moves to the face before the conscious mind registers the impulse. Throat clearing and swallowing. Stress causes the throat to tighten and become dry. People who are lying often clear their throat or swallow more frequently. Again, this is involuntary. You can't easily suppress it because you don't consciously notice you're doing it until after it happens. Postural shifts. Watch someone's body position when you ask an uncomfortable question. If they're lying or hiding something, they often shift their posture, creating distance or turning slightly away. The body is literally trying to escape the interaction, even while the person stays in place. These aren't certainties. Context matters enormously. Someone might blink more because they're tired, touch their face because it itches, or shift position because they're uncomfortable with the question for reasons unrelated to deception. But clusters of these behaviors, especially when they appear together at specific moments in conversation, create patterns that are worth noticing. Here's where body language gets really interesting from a psychological standpoint. Your unconscious mind is far better at reading these cues than your conscious mind. You walk away from a conversation feeling like something was off, but you can't articulate why. That's your unconscious processing body language signals that your conscious mind didn't explicitly notice. Studies using fMRI brain scans show that our brains register micro-expressions and body language cues even when we're not consciously aware of them. The information is being processed. It's affecting our judgments and feelings about people. We just don't have conscious access to why we feel the way we do. This is why gut feelings about people are sometimes accurate. You're not being psychic. Your unconscious is reading body language signals and generating an emotional response based on pattern recognition. But here's the problem. Your unconscious can also be wrong, especially when cultural differences, neurodiversity, or individual quirks create body language that means something different than you assume. Someone from a culture where direct eye contact is aggressive might avoid your gaze out of respect, not deception. An autistic person might have unusual body language patterns that have nothing to do with truthfulness. An anxious person might display all the classic signs of lying simply because they're anxious about the interaction itself. So body language is informative, but it's not determinative. It's data, not proof. Now, let's talk about specific body language patterns and what they actually reveal, because most people misinterpret these constantly. Crossed arms. Everyone thinks this means defensive or closed off. Sometimes it does. But often it just means the person is cold, the position is comfortable, or it's a habitual posture that means nothing emotionally. Context is everything. What matters more is when arms cross in response to something specific. If you raise a topic and the person's arms immediately fold across their chest, that's a defensive response to that topic. The timing is the signal, not the position itself. Leaning in versus leaning back. Generally, leaning towards someone signals interest and engagement, while leaning back signals disinterest or disagreement. But this varies by personality and culture. Some people lean back because they need more physical space, not because they're disengaged. Again, watch for changes. If someone was leaning in and then leans back in response to something you said, that's meaningful. Their baseline posture tells you less than their shifts in response to specific moments. Fidgeting and stillness. Excessive fidgeting often signals anxiety or discomfort. But complete stillness can signal something too. When people are lying, they sometimes consciously control their movements to avoid giving themselves away. This results in unnatural stillness, particularly in the upper body. Natural behavior involves some movement, gesture, and shifting. Too much movement signals anxiety. Too little movement signals deliberate control. Both are worth noticing. Mirroring. When people genuinely connect, they unconsciously mirror each other's body language. You lean left, they lean left. You cross your legs, they cross their legs. This happens outside conscious awareness and indicates rapport and comfort. When mirroring is absent in a conversation that should have rapport, or when it suddenly stops, that signals disconnection or discomfort. The body is revealing that psychological connection has broken even if the words haven't changed. But here's the most powerful application of body language knowledge. It's not primarily about reading others. It's about controlling your own signals. If you're aware that your body betrays your feelings, you can make deliberate choices about what to reveal and what to conceal. Not to be manipulative, but to navigate situations strategically. Job interview? Adopt open body language, maintain comfortable eye contact, mirror the interviewer subtly. You're signaling confidence and rapport, even if you feel nervous inside. Difficult conversation? Be aware of defensive postures you might unconsciously adopt and actively counteract them. Uncross your arms, maintain forward lean, keep your hands visible and still. You're signaling openness even if you feel guarded. This isn't being fake. It's managing the impression you create, which is a legitimate social skill. Your feelings are yours. What you broadcast to others is a choice, at least partially. There's also the feedback loop between body and mind. Research shows that adopting confident body language actually makes you feel more confident. Sitting up straight improves mood. Smiling triggers positive emotion. The body isn't just expressing the mind, the body is influencing the mind. This is called embodied cognition, and it reveals that the relationship between internal state and external behavior is bidirectional. You can change how you feel by changing how you hold your body. But perhaps the most important insight about body language is this. Humans are leaky. We cannot fully control what we broadcast. There will always be signals that escape our conscious management. This means that living with integrity, being honest, and aligning your words with your actual feelings is not just ethical. It's strategic. The less dissonance exists between what you're saying and what you're feeling, the less your body has to hide. People who are consistently authentic have congruent body language. What they say matches what their body shows. This creates a sense of trustworthiness that people feel even if they can't articulate why. Meanwhile, people who constantly manage impressions, hide feelings, or lie regularly develop chronically incongruent body language. They're always broadcasting mixed signals, and people sense this as untrustworthiness even when they can't explain what feels off. Your body will betray your lies. Not perfectly, not always, but enough that perceptive people will catch the signals. The question is whether you're living in a way that requires constant concealment, or whether your external presentation can match your internal reality. Body language reveals the truth beneath the performance. It shows what we're really feeling, what we're really thinking, what we're really experiencing. And in a world of carefully curated images and strategic communication, this raw, uncontrolled channel of information might be the most honest thing about us. Learn to read it in others, but more importantly, learn what yours is saying. Because whether you know it or not, your body is talking. The only question is whether you're listening. The facial expression that rewires your brain. Here's an experiment. Right now, force yourself to smile. Not a real smile, a fake one. Just pull the corners of your mouth up and hold it for 30 seconds. Do it even though you probably don't feel happy. Something strange happens. Within moments, your mood actually starts to shift. The fake smile begins to feel slightly real. A small elevation in mood occurs that wasn't there before you smiled. This seems impossible, How can a fake expression create a genuine feeling? Welcome to the facial feedback hypothesis, one of the most fascinating and counterintuitive discoveries in psychology. Your face doesn't just express your emotions, your face creates your emotions. The mechanism is surprisingly simple. When you smile, even artificially, you activate specific facial muscles. These muscles send signals to your brain. Your brain receives these signals and essentially concludes, the smile muscles are active. We must be happy. So it starts producing the neurochemistry associated with happiness. This isn't placebo. This is your brain using external cues, your own facial muscles, to determine what emotion you should be experiencing. The process is called proprioceptive feedback, and it works in reverse of what we assume. We think, I feel happy, therefore I smile. But the relationship is bidirectional. I smile, therefore I feel happy. The external expression influences the internal state just as much as the internal state influences the expression. Research by psychologist Robert Zionk showed that facial expressions actually change blood flow to the brain, which affects neurotransmitter production and brain temperature. A smile increases blood flow to the frontal cortex, which is associated with positive emotion. A frown decreases it, which is associated with negative emotion. You're literally changing your brain chemistry through facial muscles. The expression comes first, the emotion follows. This has been tested dozens of ways. Researchers had participants hold a pen between their teeth, which forces the mouth into a smile position without people realizing they're smiling. These participants rated cartoons as funnier than participants who held the pen with their lips, which prevents smiling. Same cartoons, same people. The only difference was facial muscle activation, and it changed their subjective experience of humor. Another study had people furrow their brows while reading sad passages versus reading with relaxed faces. The furrowed brow group reported feeling significantly sadder, even though the content was identical. The facial expression intensified the emotional response. This works with all emotions, not just happiness. Adopting an angry expression makes you feel angrier. Adopting a fearful expression makes you feel more afraid. Adopting a relaxed expression makes you feel calmer. The face is a control panel for your emotional state. Now here's where this gets practically powerful. If you can change how you feel by changing your facial expression, you have a tool for emotional regulation that requires no special equipment, no medication, no therapy. Just facial muscles. Feeling anxious before a presentation? Deliberately relax your face, unclench your jaw, soften your eyes. Breathe through a slight smile. Your brain will receive these signals and begin down-regulating the stress response. Not completely, but measurably. Feeling unmotivated and depressed? Force yourself to smile periodically throughout the day. It feels fake at first, but the neurochemical shifts are real. You're essentially hacking your brain's emotion detection system. This is why people who smile more, even artificially at first, tend to become genuinely happier over time. They're training their brains to associate their facial position with positive emotion, and eventually, the association becomes automatic. But there's a darker side to this that needs addressing. The same mechanism works in reverse. If you constantly hold your face in expressions of stress, anger, or sadness, you're training your brain to produce those emotional states more readily. Look at someone who's chronically stressed. Their face shows it. Tight jaw, furrowed brow, tense eyes. But here's the feedback loop. That facial tension is also maintaining the stress. The face tells the brain there's danger. The brain produces stress hormones, which cause more facial tension, which tells the brain there's more danger. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. And most people have no idea they're doing it. The modern world makes this worse. We spend hours staring at screens with our faces in neutral or slightly negative expressions. We're not smiling at a computer. We're often frowning slightly in concentration. Over hours and days and years, this trains a baseline facial position that signals to our brains that things are mildly negative. This might be contributing to rising rates of depression and anxiety. Not screens themselves, but the facial positions we hold while using them. There's also the social dimension. Humans are incredibly attuned to facial expressions in others. We unconsciously mirror the expressions we see. This is why moods are contagious. You talk to someone who's genuinely happy, smiling naturally, and you find yourself smiling too. Your mirror neurons fire. you adopt their expression, and the facial feedback hypothesis means you start feeling what they're feeling. The same works with negative emotions. Be around someone who's angry or depressed, and you'll unconsciously mirror their facial tension and start feeling those emotions yourself. This is why emotional environment matters so much. You're not just exposed to other people's moods through their behavior. You're literally catching their emotional states through facial mimicry and feedback. Now let's address the authenticity concern. Doesn't faking a smile make you inauthentic? Isn't it emotionally dishonest to manipulate your own feelings through facial expressions? Here's the reframe. You're not being inauthentic. You're being strategic about which emotional state you cultivate. Your face is going to influence your emotions whether you're conscious of it or not. You might as well direct it towards states that serve you. If you're stuck in a negative emotional state that isn't helpful, using facial expression to shift it isn't fake. It's emotional self-regulation. You're not pretending to be happy when you're sad. You're using a tool to actually become happier. The distinction matters. Suppressing emotions is unhealthy, but shifting emotions through embodied techniques is a skill. There's also compelling research on long-term effects. A study followed people over decades and found that those who smiled more genuinely in old photographs had better life outcomes, longer marriages, and greater life satisfaction years later. This could be because happy people smile more, obviously, but it could also be that people who smiled more trained their brains toward positivity through decades of facial feedback, which created better outcomes. The causation likely runs both ways. Happiness causes smiling, and smiling causes happiness. It's a virtuous cycle that compounds over time. Here's a practical application that combines everything. Start each morning by deliberately smiling at yourself in the mirror for 60 seconds. It will feel absurd. Do it anyway. You're accomplishing multiple things. You're activating facial feedback to shift your baseline mood upward. You're training your brain to associate your own face with positive emotion. You're practicing emotional self-regulation. And you're setting a physiological tone for the day. People who do this consistently report that it becomes less fake over time. Eventually, the smile feels natural, and the mood elevation becomes automatic. You've rewired the neural pathways connecting facial expression and emotional state. This is neuroplasticity in action. Your brain is constantly reorganizing based on repeated patterns. If the pattern is chronic facial tension and negative expressions, your brain wires for negativity. If the pattern is regular smiling and relaxed facial muscles, your brain wires for positivity. You're not stuck with the emotional patterns you have. You can literally reshape them through something as simple as facial expression. But perhaps the most profound implication is philosophical. If our emotions are partly created by our facial expressions, then emotions aren't just things that happen to us. They're partly things we do, often unconsciously, through how we hold our faces and bodies. This means we have more agency over our emotional lives than we typically assume. Not complete control. Emotions are complex and influenced by many factors, but significant influence through embodied practices. The face you make becomes the emotion you feel. The emotion you feel becomes the life you live. And all of it starts with something as simple as the position of your facial muscles. So the next time you're feeling stuck in a negative emotional state, remember, you have a control panel. It's right there on your face. Use it. Smile, even if it's fake. Relax your jaw, soften your eyes, breathe gently, and watch as your brain, following the signals from your face, begins to shift the chemistry that creates your experience of being alive. Your face is talking to your brain constantly. The question is whether you're saying what you actually want to feel. 6 psychological facts about human behavior that most people ignore, not because they're hidden, but because they're uncomfortable. They reveal that we're less in control, less rational, and less aware than we like to believe. Ignoring someone creates obsession because your brain is wired to pursue uncertainty. Silence forces confession because humans can't tolerate the psychological void. The eye contact rule is backwards because practiced liars have learned to game the system. Intelligence reduces social needs because cognitive capability changes the evolutionary equation. Your body broadcasts truth, even when your mouth is lying. And your facial expression doesn't just reflect emotion, it creates it. These aren't party tricks. These are fundamental mechanisms of human psychology that shape every interaction, every relationship, every decision you make. Most people will read this and forget it by tomorrow. They'll go back to chasing people who ignore them, filling uncomfortable silences, trusting the liar with steady eye contact, judging the intelligent person as antisocial, missing the body language signals right in front of them, and wondering why they can't control their moods. But you're not most people anymore. You've seen the code. You understand the patterns. The question now is what you do with this knowledge. Use it ethically. Use it wisely. But most importantly, use it. Because understanding human behavior doesn't just help you read others. It helps you understand yourself, your patterns, your unconscious programming. And that understanding is the first step toward actually choosing how you want to show up in the world, rather than just running the ancient software that's been controlling you all along.